All right, guys, welcome back to the Out and Peter Fitness Podcast. Today, I have Ben Esgro on the podcast, which is quite a treat. Ben is, you're just talking, kind of flies under the radar and doesn't really have a very big, I guess he's not really super vocal or super out there in the industry, but he provides a wealth of knowledge about everything related to programming, supplementation. He runs his own supplement company. I believe it's Elemental for formulations right now. It used to be De Novo. He also does some powerlifting coaching. He's coached people at the highest levels and just is extremely smart. And we were actually just talking, and I figured we'd start the podcast talking about here. Ben is somebody who I've realized is extremely ethical, especially in the supplement space. And that's why I personally do support Elemental. Because they aligns with my core values. But lots of times, and I don't know if anybody's really familiar with this, but the whole testosterone thing, where they kind of realize that not only does this stuff not work, steroids don't work, you should just buy creatine. They're actually underdosed. So I guess I wanted to just let Ben give a little bit of insight into sort of the ethics of running a supplement company and what his long-term vision has always been with his supplement companies.
Sure. So first off, thanks for having me. I appreciate always the opportunity to be able to both talk with you and then share, you to share your platform to share my thoughts, my ramblings on supplements and all of these things. But yeah, I think if you go back to the way beginning of high school, Ben, I think I've never lost touch with the consumer who's just getting in, who wants answers, who wants things that are legitimate, who wants truth. And because that's what I wanted. And I think I continue to want that within anything that I get into and become passionate about. And I think the issue with fitness, and it's true of any area, but it seems that fitness might be a little more guilty of it, is that marketing really preys on the it's almost like the gains at any cost, or people's like panic of making progress, of losing fat, of gaining muscle, of getting stronger, because it knows the emotional strings to pull, and it's very effective at that. And I think I was sucked into that in the beginning. I spent a lot of money. I went down a lot of rabbit holes that were very frustrating, that didn't end in a better place. And when I started my first supplement company, De Novo, it was in my parents' house. It was actually in a spare bedroom, and I just wanted to make supplements and find out the truths by doing it myself. Really, I think there's a theme ongoing in my life of like learning by doing, because I think you can read as much as you want in a book, but you kind of have to get your hands dirty to really understand something inside out. And that's true of programming too. That's another rabbit hole we can go down in a bit, but I think for me, the thing was that I wasn't even trying to build a business. I was really just trying to see what was real and what wasn't. And that led me to go to my undergrad for nutrition. That led me to keep going for a graduate degree, for a second one, and to try to build out the company. Because at that time, I felt that the market was wide open, because it was in many ways worse than it is now. In some ways better, in many ways worse, in that you can get away with a lot more with advertising, and it wasn't a thing to, well, companies were marketing on being science-based, but it wasn't, they were using it a lot more loosely. Whereas now, I think companies have realized the general audience is a little more educated than they were then. So there's not glutamine in everything, there's not arginine in everything. There's regular creatine rather than 9,000 different derivatives of it in everything. So in that ways, it's improved, and I think regulation and pharma and food companies getting in have made it improved and become more quality control based too. But I think on the bad side, what has changed a lot is marketing is now more present than ever, obviously with social media networks and things like that, where there's so much, it's all about content and eyes and views and stuff like that. And so much information's out there, but I think you can you can understand deep things without having a deep understanding of them, if that makes sense. And it's a strange place to be in. So I think, to finish my point on all of that, is I think you kind of have to choose a path you want to go down. And I think there's more than enough people who are putting out endless content, that I'd prefer for me to really focus on, whenever I have an opportunity to talk like this or provide any type of information, uh, that it can be that nitty gritty aspect and not have to be about always a pitch at the end, or a conversion. What's the business thing? ABC, always be closing. Like there's no real intent of it, rather than, I almost think, to breadcrumb people to try to go down a path that gave me so many enlightening answers. So sorry, I rambled a bit there, but hopefully that landed in a place that makes sense.
No, it does. That's actually exactly how I started, like my little coaching company. It was, I kind of was doing it a little off and on during school. During I was halfway through my master's in athletic training, and then COVID hits, and I was like, I have no idea how long this is going to be. I don't want to pay $35,000 for a master, so I'm just going to get out of school. And I looked around, like there's no jobs that I really wanted to do. Like I'm not going to, like, I didn't spend 5 years of my life, you know, like suffering to, you know, go work in sales. And so I
Right.
decided to go into coaching, and kind of like with you, it was just passion. It was literally like, I'm just going to do this. I'm going to try really hard. I'm going to put out lots of free content. And my whole thing was like, it was never sort of like what you said would like always be closing. It was, let's put out lots of really good free content. Let's try to help people, and really have them understand what actually works and what doesn't. Because I love what you said about wanting, kind of like you wanted truth, like you were just hungry for knowledge. And like that was me when I just started. Like I was obsessed, and I could take it, like you were probably obsessed with, you know, the nutrition side of things. And I saw that when I really listened to you, and that's why I decided to support your company with your formulations and whatnot. Because um, in my opinion, I feel like most of this does have to stem from passion if you're going to do it the right way, and instead of wanting to do it for just for monetary gain. Now, obviously, you need to provide for yourself, but I
Yep.
found that if you're ethical and if you are still staying true to your morals and you're just trying to help people, the money's going to come in from, like, anyways. It's
Yeah,
you have to play the long term game with really any business, and also
absolutely.
like it applies a lot to fitness too. Like, I mean, I wish I was like, you know, if you were to tell me, like, you know, I'd be like where I was right now, like 700-pound deadlift at like 181. Uh, 5 years ago, nope. And guess what? Like, there's lots of ups and downs, and then I know off and on lat injury, and I'm still dealing with that. But and I'm sure with you, you know, having to go a completely different direction with Omar and going to
Sure.
elemental, like having to shift things. But but the thing is that if you're not passionate, you're going to just give up. And that's the same thing with like fitness, nutrition, anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there's a really good, um, I guess, soundbite of Bill Gates and Steve Jobs talking about, somebody in the audience. This is from an older, probably over a decade old now. This like summit where the two of them are talking about building a business and stuff. And somebody asked him like, well, what advice would you give somebody who's trying to start a business? And basically his advice is that, like, um, it really makes no sense to do it unless you are passionate, because any logical person would give up, because the logic of it, objectively, it doesn't make sense. So I think you really have to have a why, and you really have to have that why be well defined, and then just go all in on it, because it doesn't make sense otherwise. And the logical thing oftentimes would be to give up. I mean, I've had many of those points in my journey as well. But I think what I've found is, as long as you are providing something that is helping people, the audience will come, just like you said. And it might not be immediate, it might be slow, but I have continued to find that it's worth it, because it does reach the people that you're hoping to reach. And I think there's a reason that I've been able to still be involved in supplements, um, for over a decade now. Whereas there's many companies that were much bigger that aren't even around anymore. Um, So I'd like to think that it's for many of those reasons, is that it's spoken to people that that it's provided something beyond just, you know, a pill or a powder that makes you believe something, that there's something a little deeper than that. Um, so yeah, I mean, it is a very fascinating journey.
For sure. So I guess kind of dovetailing off that, I want to get right into I think really everybody's favorite supplement, which is caffeine. Caffeine is basically the most widely used drug in like all around the world. So I guess like first off, just to give some context, like what is a stimulant? Um, like what are the classes of stimulants and how does caffeine fit into that overall picture?
Yeah, so I mean, stimulants are anything that are psychoactive that increase, uh, you know, alertness, perceived energy, anything like that. I'm sure you can give a better textbook definition than that, but um, essentially, at some point, or either directly or indirectly, they're going to influence the sympathetic nervous system to release either catecholamines or epinephrine or adrenaline at some point in the pathway. And like indirectly, caffeine does that. It's not its direct mechanism, but because, you know, these pathways are super complex and probably not necessary to go into the depth of them. But usually at some point, something is interacting with the receptor that ultimately downstream will make epinephrine be released, because that is really the classical stimulant. That is the classical alertness increasing neurotransmitter. And largely, I mean, it makes sense. It's the fight or flight hormone. You know, it's what you need to release if you need to survive. If something's chasing you, or you need to, you know, you need to do something really quickly and get out. So most stimulants will influence epinephrine or the classical neurotransmitters, which are really, you know, like I said, catecholamines. So, you know, like dopamine, serotonin. Serotonin is not quite as directly, but adrenaline, serotonin, and dopamine really, you know, are the ones that are the main ones that are going to have some effect on either your motivation or your stimulation.
Awesome. So I guess going from that, in terms of caffeine and dosage, so I know that's so my understanding is that with the current literature, it's about 3 to 6 milligrams per kilogram.
Mhm.
Um, my question with that is, if you were to dose that, um, how would you sort of, I guess, periodize like your caffeine intake? Because obviously like that's a decently wide range, and sometimes like you might be like, well, like how much do I take? Like that's a big range.
Yeah, I mean, it can even go higher than that. I mean, if you're talking about like lifting performance studies, I think they've even gone. I think there's one up to 9. It's kind of crazy, uh, but I think the basic starting point is always, and this is true of things like volume as well, like training volume when you're talking about powerlifters or bodybuilders, is I think it should always be minimum effective dose. What you should be ideally striving for to find, um, because the issue is, you know, a higher dose may give you more of the endpoint of stimulation, but you also have to realize that it's also increased the probability of side effects. That's true of any drug, any um, both any outside compound, but even outside stimulus. Like I said, you know, you could make the same case for mechanical stress from like resistance from training. Too high a dose of that, it might make you stronger quicker, but it also will increase the probability of side effects like an injury, like a joint or a tendon or ligament issue. So I think in the general theme of that, you should always be striving to find the minimal effective, and then staying there unless it's required to go higher. I think there's this trend of people sort of chasing the higher dose, and I think that's very short-sighted. I mean, you've seen this. I've seen this from my involvement in the industry. Like I said, over the past decade, like RTDs came on the scene. They started around monster level caffeine, 180, 200 milligrams. Now there's Bang and Rain, which are 300 plus, and that has become sort of the standard. And now you have pre-workouts where before they'd be around 200. Then it's sort of escalated to 3. Now you see 4, 450, 500. And there's a demand, as a business owner, you realize there's a demand for those things. And it always makes me ask the question of like, what's going on here? And I think the concern is that people want to sort of be overstimulated. People always want to feel something. The best supplements make you feel something. That's why beta alanine's around. You could argue that it's really not that effective. You could make a strong case to say it's really not that effective, but it makes you feel something, so people believe it works. But with caffeine, I think it's sort of this dangerous combination of things where people take it to try to hit a PR in training, or just be amped up in general. Okay, I accept that. That's fine. I mean, that's normal. I do that too. But let's just build this case of this hypothetical person where they have classes or they work a 9 to 5. They get out, they take their 400 milligram dose of caffeine. That even seems conservative these days. I've heard people take a lot more, like up to a gram or more a day. They go and train. They don't realize that, although they might not feel it as strongly, there's still caffeine floating in their blood by 10, 11, 12 p.m., enough to affect their sleep. So they don't get a full restful sleep like they would have without the caffeine in their blood. Then the next day they feel a little groggy, tired. They take 400 again. They don't feel the same effects from the 400 because they haven't done the required things to really reset themselves. One of them is clear adenosine from the receptors, which sleep does. So they're required to take a higher dose of caffeine to feel the same effect. And then it becomes this dangerous, vicious cycle of like undersleeping and overstimming. And then you get to a point where, you're taking 800 plus, maybe more milligrams of caffeine just to chase that same feel that you would have gotten from 300 if you just maybe took it a little bit earlier, were a little conservative with your escalation of dosing, or just got much better sleep. So I think on the outside, sort of the pharmacology of it is an interesting case study for me, but it's a very unpopular view when you're trying to encourage people towards that path, when they're really just saying, well, I need something stronger, I need it today. That's a dangerous viewpoint to have long term.
I agree. And I've definitely fallen into that trap. I especially think that like in every single prep, especially like once I get like, it's like a peaking block, I'm more tired, it's especially like that last week where, I have like an RPE 8 single. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I need to be on. And then, you take more, and it can sort of like sometimes like you said, I know I took 4 milligrams of caffeine. I don't feel it though. Like, what's going on? Like, is something wrong with like you said, although you might not realize it, like it's still in your bloodstream. It's still doing all these effects, reducing pain perception, time to fatigue, all that good stuff. And then, making you somewhat happy because like that's what caffeine does as well. I definitely turned into this negative spiral. I've definitely gotten into the trap of like having doses of close to a gram, because the same thing happens to me. Like my sleep gets worse. I get more anxious too. It's like this perpetual cycle. And so something I've kind of fallen into, and my friend Trey and I actually, like, we both kind of had like a discussion about this. We're like, hey, like we need help. Like we need to like stop. And so I guess like what we did is we kind of just started with like this rule that like we're not going above 3 milligrams like a kilogram, like until it's like a really important session, because it still works. Then we're still getting the effects. Our sleep is better because, like you mentioned, because correct me if I'm wrong, but with the adenosine receptors, caffeine basically blocks the adenosine to the receptor, and if you don't have it as much sleep, you don't have the same I guess receptor affinity for ATP at that time, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so the currently accepted primary mechanism of caffeine is an adenosine receptor antagonist. So basically it will bind the adenosine receptor and prevent, so it won't activate it. So you could have multiple roles at a receptor. You can have an inhibitory effect. You can have, it can be competitive, it can be non-competitive. There's multiple subclasses of that. And then you can activate a receptor. So, adenosine is what activates the adenosine receptor. That's not a good thing for energy. Basically what's happening is like And again, I'll try to keep this as brief as I can because it can quickly get long and complicated. But throughout the day, in basic biology, you learn that ATP is your primary source for energy. You're making ATP from the energy providing macronutrients that you consume throughout the day. So as you break down ATP is adenosine triphosphate. You can cleave off one of those phosphates, use that for energy production. Then you have ADP, and then you can cleave another, and then you have AMP. AMP is sort of like a signaling molecule, like a switch for the body to realize like we're low in energy. We need to start breaking things down like fat or glycogen. Then you can have free adenosine. Once you've broken it, basically all the high energy phosphates off, you can have adenosine. Once adenosine's floating around, it's obviously letting your body know like we're low on energy here, and it builds something called sleep pressure. So one of the reasons you feel fatigue, or if you took an adenosine receptor agonist, not an antagonist, something that activated the receptor, you can actually cause drowsiness. There are drugs that that can do that. So what happens is caffeine it looks like adenosine, so it can bind the receptor, but it doesn't activate it. So what that causes is you can cause this buildup of adenosine happening throughout the day. If there's enough caffeine available, you can overcome adenosine and block its effects. Or if you're well slept, there's not much adenosine floating around, you can take caffeine and it'll bind and you'll get a prominent effect. So one of the things that sleep does is it clears adenosine from the receptors. So you are making it more difficult by not sleeping to get the same effect from the same dose of caffeine, because the only way you can overcome it is a higher dose. Because like I said, it's a competitive inhibitor. So it will always compete. If there's adenosine floating around, caffeine's going to compete for that same binding pocket. So the best thing you could possibly do is get enough sleep, have less adenosine at those receptors, and you will feel more from that lower dose of caffeine. And exactly what you said, practically the best way to do these things is take your caffeine earlier, because it has less probability of impacting sleep. Have a hard cutoff of the dose. Like for me, I won't go above 300. Really, 400 is the max cap for me. And practically how I know that is the next day, if I take 300, I won't have withdrawal symptoms if the next day I don't take caffeine. If I take 400 plus, I have immediate withdrawal symptoms the next day. So that's a hard cutoff for me, because I'm not trying to have like withdrawal symptoms of caffeine. They're real. I mean, like I said, it's a drug. It is addictive. It sucks. I'm moody. I feel shitty. I'm unmotivated. That crushes my ability to be productive. So I always take it earlier in the day. My hard cutoff is 300, and I won't redose. Even if I don't feel great later, I'll make myself prioritize where I need that caffeine, and I'll kind of bunch everything more around that in the beginning of the day versus just keep redosing.
Yeah, and like also with those withdrawal symptoms, like I like need like it's like I need more sleep. Like that's probably like the best thing that you can actually do,
Yeah.
because you're probably not sleeping well, or you're not getting the same sleep quality, and your body needs to catch up on it. So yeah, I definitely think that's some really good insight. So I know that in terms of half life, there's slow metabolizers and there's
Yep.
fast metabolizers. Is there any way to practically know that? Besides,
I think, I
genetics?
mean, it's funny. Yeah. I mean, I've had it validated just by getting genotyping. So I've done 23andMe. But I knew I was a slow metabolizer before that. So it just kind of validated my hunch. And the reason I knew that is I always feel caffeine longer than even like someone like my mom who's a fast metabolizer. She will redose during the day. I never felt the need to. I feel the energy pretty much for the whole day. And it will really, like, I am very sensitive to caffeine, like 100, 200, I get a notable effect. So I think the most practical way to probably know is if right when you started using caffeine, you felt it from a pretty low dose, and you tend to feel caffeine for a long time, you're probably a slow metabolizer. Versus if you find you're needing to redose after an hour or two, more likely that you're probably a fast metabolizer. And I
Yeah,
think the only way to validate that, lab wise, is probably genotyping or or getting blood work, which is much harder to do. Genotyping is only $100 with 23andMe.
Yeah, I'm definitely a slower metabolizer. Except on powerlifting meets, like I'm like deadlift comes around, I'm like I'm ready for another dose.
Sure.
So I think that's a really good overview of caffeine. Definitely something that you can use for enhancing your performance, blunting hunger and fat loss days, but definitely don't abuse it to the point where you're having those secondary effects that probably are not good. It's like if you're not sleeping, you're not recovering. That's the most important thing. It's kind of like the whole stand efforting analogy of like stepping over like quarters, like pick up pennies or something like that. But I want to ask about nootropics, and specifically one called alpha GPC. If you're familiar with that, and kind of give like a little bit of a breakdown of its benefits, because it's been something I've been more interested in. I've also been supplementing that in addition to caffeine. I found that I can actually take that and I don't need as much caffeine.
Sure. Yeah. So to my knowledge, caffeine does not, and I missed one prior when we talked about stimulants. Acetylcholine is another thing that is a stimulatory neurotransmitter. To my knowledge, caffeine does not increase acetylcholine. So alpha GPC is something that is an acetylcholine precursor. So it stands for alpha glycerophosphocholene. So it's basically choline that has these groups attached that ultimately make it a precursor to making acetylcholine. People may have traditionally heard, again, if you've gone through an exercise science program or probably biology, you will have heard of acetylcholine because it's what's released at the neuromuscular junction for muscle firing. So that's what sends the signal to actually contract a muscle. So it's stimulatory in that sense, but it's also, you have cholinergic inputs at multiple places throughout the central nervous system, especially the brain, at multiple parts of the brain. So where this whole field of nootropics came from was, I believe it was like the 80s. Now there's a great paper, if people really want to dive into the weeds on this, it's a review paper, it's a 3-part review paper called Cognitive Enhancers, Nootropics. Frostel is the author. If you can't find it, people can message me and I'll send them the PDF. So this goes into like every subclass of nootropics, but the original idea came from understanding that choline was an important aspect of cognitive decline, especially with things like Alzheimer's and memory impairments. So nootropic just means mind forward or mind enhancing. So a lot of these original smart drugs were based upon improving choline, and those were racetams, which are drugs, not supplements. So people may have heard of piracetam, pramiracetam, different derivatives of racetams, and what they all worked on was choline or acetylcholine, increasing acetylcholine. Then came these supplemental ingredients. Originally, there was always just direct choline, so like choline bitartrate, choline citrate. Those forms, from what I understood prior, were not didn't make it into the blood to make it to target tissues very well. They'd be taken up by the liver because choline is an important dietary nutrient as well. And then these different prodrugs for choline started coming out and being sold as supplements. One of them is alpha GPC. Another one that has quite a bit of data behind it is citicoline, which is or CDP choline, cytosine diphosphocholline. And both these two work. They work pretty much equally as effective. The real difference is cost, and then what the different moieties of the compound do, meaning the GPC part of alpha GPC doesn't really have much cognitive benefit, whereas the cytidine does. Again, people can dig into the weeds as much as they want on that. But Cognizin is the patented form of that. So if people have ever heard of Cognizin, that's the CEP choline. So anyway, both ultimately increase acetylcholine in the brain, and that's what causes these cognitive benefits. A lot of them are alertness, really memory and focus ability, because that's a classical role of choline, of acetylcholine. Practically, as a formulator, if you were to ask me like what's the difference and why I choose one or the over the other, the one thing I don't like about alpha GPC is it has a tendency to clump. So whenever you buy it, usually you're going to buy it's a 50% form of alpha GPC. I think I'm forgetting what the bulking agent they use is, but it actually prevents it from clumping. Like if you bought 100% pure alpha GPC, it gels like almost immediately. If you just let it sit out, it would gel. That's very hard to make into a powder product because people, it's going to clump. You're not going to get a scoop. It's going to, it's not going to be very user friendly. Whereas that doesn't happen with CDP choline. We have used both. When we do use alpha GPC, we use the 50% version because that one clumps less. I will stop there because I don't want to get too far off of what you were bringing up and asking about. But I guess the last point is that's sort of the art of formulating, of making a multi-dimensional product that's not just caffeine based. Is there's other neurotransmitters you can work on beyond just adenosine or the indirect effects of something like caffeine, and that's what builds a whole different feel of a product from just going and drinking a Bang or buying straight caffeine pills.
Absolutely, and I think that's actually like the biggest. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's like the biggest difference between like pre-workout formulas and then just like the caffeine, just taking like caffeine pill. It's just all the other things. Maybe they might add in like some citrulline malate, beta alanine, like you said. So I think that's I did not know about the you say it was the alpha CDP. It says GPC.
So alpha GPC is the one form, and the other one is CDP choline.
CDP choline. Okay, I was not aware of that. Did they? I know that I'm assuming that you have that in the elemental pre-workout, correct?
Yeah. So we use.
So I guess I know this will be like this is like capitalism, but like can you like walk through like essentially like your pre-workout formula and like because like I'll be completely honest, like I've tried I've tried Grill Mind, I've tried Redcon One, I've tried like insert whatever pre-workouts, and like none of them had like the similar like feel of just like there's my biggest issue with most pre-workouts. I hear a lot of people is like I just felt like anxious and just like overstimulated. And with this, it was like, holy crap, like I feel focused, I feel actually good. I don't feel like my heart is going to explode. So can you like kind of like walk through like your thought process with your formulation?
Yeah, I think, to me, I really believe that formulation is that there's an artistic side to it. And what I believe that art is finding those balance of feels. And I look at it almost as conversations through chemistry. And it like you could be nerdy about it and talk about all the neurotransmitters, or you can have just the practical experiential side as well. And again, I think that's what for me comes from the years of using so many different supplements. Like originally what it came, like it wasn't this super sophisticated process. It was me keeping notes on products I used that I liked and I felt, and then seeing what were the common themes, what were the patterns in that. Like, okay, this had synephrine in it, this had caffeine in it, this had, or I'd buy single ingredients. Like I bought Cognizin back in 2012. It was a relatively unheard of ingredient. And then once we released Utopia, it seemed like everybody started putting, Cognizin or CDP choline in their stuff, or alpha GPC. But to answer the question, I think it's this fine balancing act where if you just rely on caffeine or something like yohimbine, you can't use synephrine anymore, you can't use epinephrine anymore. Those are really direct adrenergic agonists, things that are going to release adrenaline. Those will really stimulate you, but the problem is it's a binary effect in people, where some people, again, that's why they call it the fight or flight response, and it's based upon your own genetics, where we can literally give you an IV of adrenaline and you will have a binary response in people. Some people will prep for a fight, some people will get a lot of anxiety and jitters and want to run, essentially, or it will cause anxiety. And something that's like a a very strong um, epinephrine releaser is yohimbine, and it will cause that. So you will find some people love yohimbine because it makes them really stimmed and they're ready, like they feel less pain, they're just pumped up to lift, they get the fight response, and some people get like crippling anxiety from it. So if you go really hard down that path of just high stim, heavy stim, I think you'll appeal to some part of the market that responds really well to that, and then another part that can barely handle that. Um, but I think I'm more interested in the balancing act of that. And one of the things that's interesting about cholinergics is they give that nice, smooth balancing aspect. Like, now I'm speaking practically, not academically, is like the feel of cholinergics are very focused in. You get that kind of tunnel vision. It's sort of more tranquil stimulation. It's not that feel of like, oh my God, I'm amped, I'm ready. You know, it's a lot more peaceful stimulation. So I think, like you said, when you kind of have a balance where you get a little bit of input of the stimulant aspect of a caffeine, you balance it with a nice dose of a cholinergic, it leads to a different type of stimulation, and it pulls back a lot on the anxiety. And I think some of the popular things I've seen that don't have a lot of basis in the research are like people going gung-ho about stuff like theanine because it's supposed to counter caffeine and give you more focus. But practically, I found theanine has, you know, some effects that are not as nice or clean as cholinergics are. Like if you go too high in theanine, it can actually kind of make you feel it's a bit of a downer. And I think that's because it has some anti-serotonergic properties, where I'd much prefer something like a cholinergic. And again, that's why we use it. Like, so it took me forever to get to the actual formulas, but that's why we use cholinergics and then acetylcholinesterase inhibitors in our products, because you'll get a more amplified response from that dose of cholinergics. So practically what that means on an ingredient level is if we provide a prodrug for choline, which in prime pre is alpha GPC, and then huperzine, which is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, we'll get more from that dosage of choline that we use. It will increase acetylcholine levels a little bit higher. They'll stay elevated longer because it's blocking the breakdown of acetylcholine. And then we do the same thing with different ingredients in Utopia. So we have huperzine in Utopia as well. And then we use the CDP choline in that one. And just because it just tends to orient itself better for a pure focus product, whereas Prime Pre is trying to get you a little more amped than just like Zend in. You know, building the formulas around those endpoints is really what dictates what ingredients I'm going to use as well. So there's more dopaminergic ingredients in Utopia. So we use L-Dopa. It's a precursor to dopamine. Again, the dopamine is huge for both reward and motivation. A lot of the best stimulants that are not allowed to be used, you know, like methamphetamines and amphetamines, work strongly on the dopamine pathway. That's why they were so popular originally when they were released, you know, in the Germany war efforts, because they will get you tunnel visioned in and zoned in. We just use much safer versions of you know, dopamine precursors. And then, like I said, a lot of stuff comes down from just getting in, diving into papers and the nitty gritty. So we'll balance the dopaminergics with some serotonergics as well, because there's issues if you have an imbalance in those two. That's why we put 5-HTP in Utopia. It's not in Prime Pre because there's no direct dopaminergics. And then again, just some support ingredients, like Utopia has vitamin C. That's because I've found some research showing that vitamin C improves L-Dopa, both absorption, bioavailability, and some other supportive effects for neural health. And then Prime Pre has the more classical pre-workout ingredients where there's beta alanine in there, again, because people just demand it. I'll be the first person to honestly say that it's not really in there beyond just people want it. People want those pins and needles feels. And then we use straight L-citrulline at a high enough dose that, you know, we can validate that it's going to do something to improve blood flow. So yeah, again, I'll stop there because I rambled on a bit, and we'll talk about anything else that you want to within that.
No, I think that's all really insightful because I don't think many people think about much beyond just like a brand name and not exactly like what these all these
Sure.
different products do. Because usually when people are buying a pre-workout, it's just because of like, oh, my favorite influencer takes this. I want to take that too.
So, that's a great point, and I think, I'll be honest, I've submitted to accepting that that's part of the supplement space. That being said, I do think one thing people have, you don't have to. It's just like I had this great biomechanics professor in grad school where he said, everybody's a biomechanist. It's just the academics can explain it in the jargon, whereas the layperson can't. But you understand certain things like, if I extend my knee, uh, like you have this internal understanding of what extent of knee extension you're in. It's just the biomechanist is going to explain that in degrees of, knee extension, knee flexion. Whereas I think everybody has an innate understanding, or relationship with pharmacology, because you can base it on your fields. You don't need to explain, oh, the cholinergic does that, the dopaminergic does that. It's like, this feels different. So I think for me, it's an opening for a conversation on pharmacology, or it's an opening just that everything's not just caffeine, and all products are not just the same. Like, I really want to carve out. I've always wanted to carve out a niche for ourselves on. You don't have to understand what all of that means on the formula, but just understand that this feels different and sort of be intrigued by that.
Yeah, because we all have different genetics, we're all going to respond a little bit
Absolutely.
differently to every single like formula.
Absolutely.
So it's kind of about, unfortunately, like you do need to just experiment with different things, but it's something I always do recommend with everybody, just like with any other nutrition or training recommendation, is base your decisions around evidence-based principles and really choosing the right tool for the right job. So, if you really want to have that, like you said, you have the difference between your pre and your utopia. Like for one is like more so, I want to really amplify these certain pathways that are probably going to help out with exercise for performance. And now this one is probably going to help me with more focus for the smart drug. And knowing like kind of like I also will I do think it's important to like look on labels too, and
It
like
is.
find like one, like don't, like if they have a proprietary blend, run away. They should list everything. Ideally, third party tested is ideal as well,
Yep.
because with supplement companies, they're unregulated by the FDA. And so that's why I personally only support companies that are, they do get those third party tests, because I care about getting quality products. My money is very important to me, as well as my results. And while supplements may not be this magical thing, it's definitely not as more important than basic sleep training, nutrition. It's going to amplify all those things once you do have all of those in place, and basically have that extra 5%, which, if you're competitive, that's a big difference. That's a 700-pound deadlift versus 735. That's a big difference.
For
So
sure.
I really like how you point out some of the differences, and something that I usually recommend people do if they're trying to understand like what does this drug do, is to go on to examine.com, because they have a
Yep.
pretty great review about all of these ingredients, and then you can kind of look at products, and it does take some time, but definitely something to look at. And then I also think last thing is, because you did, obviously this is based on a lot of my favorite influencer does take this. I would probably align more of my choices with this with people that actually have an evidence-based background, instead of just
Sure.
like some dude that look kind of jacked and makes TikTok and just makes TikToks.
Yeah, I think really the most basic starting point is to start from a place of skepticism rather than belief. I think that will take you a lot further, as just a general consumer in the space. Um, and that's, again, if we're to go back to my story and starting point, that's really how it started for me. I'm not saying people need to go nuts with diving into the craziness. Like, certainly Examine's a wonderful resource, but I think even in general, like you said, um, people could get so much from the information that's required to legally be on a label, um, and just looking and digging into that. Like you said, a couple of the key elements are, see if there's any type of validation, that this is tested and it has what it says in it. Look at how the doses are laid out, and then somewhere where Examine is great is to cross-check. I think it's one of the most straightforward ways of seeing what is the dose. Like, they will have synthesized and really distilled down for you, in a quick blurb, what is the ideal dose range that's been shown to be effective. And if people wanted the most minimalistic approach, it should be spin your label around, look at the supplement facts panel, look at the dosage, and then compare that to what's been shown in Examine, in a database somewhere, to work. And I think one of the biggest issues is, and it's still present, is if you look at these major mega companies, they'll put in a lot of ingredients that do work, but they'll put it in doses that are just too small.
Yeah.
Or they'll just dose the caffeine really high and then underdose everything else. So, these tactics become a lot more easy to pick up on when you just check out a little bit, like just be a diligent consumer. Like you said, if your money is important to you, just dig a little bit deeper, or you can ask the companies, ask if they can back up any of their stuff. I think that's a huge one. And now people seem to be starting to do it with the trigesterone. There seems to be this wave now starting against, where people are sort of pushing back a bit. And that makes me very happy to see, because the only way these companies can get away with it is if you allow them to.
Absolutely. Informed consumership is just, it's important. And honestly, a lot of this does fall on the customer, although, it is like, I feel for people that don't know much, and then they do get preyed upon by marketing. But I wanted to just, as I pull up your website again, I'll also put this into the show notes, but I really want to just point out there's only a few things that you sell on Elemental. And I think that's really good, because it basically is saying, like, you could literally get all the things that you need: protein monohydrate, a whey protein, and some sort of nootropic or pre-workout. And that's probably all you need. You don't need to buy all these expensive things, or glutamine, or all this other stuff. Something it actually, that's kind of an ironic thing in the enhanced community, is people spending $400 a month on like health supplements to run the drugs that they take. And it's like, maybe you should reevaluate your cycle.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I think especially, that's an area where people really need to be that much more aware, because especially if you're taking oral anabolic compounds, that's a lot to throw out your liver. And the thing that you'll see of even high dose multivitamins, where people think they're sort of benign, I would love to see some type of case study, or large funded study, where they looked at people taking a diverse array. Probably never happened. You need a lot of money to do it, but a diverse array of multivitamins, especially these high-end dosed ones, and then just do a basic blood panel and see what their liver values are on them, especially things like herbals and high dose vitamins. Again, if you're taking anything orally, it has to go through first pass, which means it goes to the liver first. Liver determines what to do with it. So when you're combining that with things that are already hard on the liver, like oral anabolics, man, I think probably enhanced athletes should be taking less supplements rather than more. But
Yeah,
it seems to be the opposite.
More liver stress in general. If you're taking all these pills, like, it's like, maybe that's why your liver enzymes are through the roof. Like, side note, if you're lifting, you're probably gonna have somewhat elevated liver enzymes. It's kind of normal, but you can definitely not have an AST and ALT of 70.
Yeah, you should still be within normal range, though, if you're lifting. If you're a heavy drinker, you won't be. But lifting, yeah, I don't know, you may be high, but still within normal.
Sure.
It's always abnormal if you're outside of normal.
Like, I get my blood done about twice a year. I'm usually like in that normal range. Like, it's like closer to the higher end, but always within that normal range.
Yeah, creatinine will be higher if you're taking
Like,
creatine.
creatinine was like really high, and I was like, yep, I power lift, everything hurts.
Yeah.
But I guess I wanted to just to wrap this up, I wanted to give it a little bit. So you have some very brief insight into training volume, because I think that this is something that is a hot topic. And I think that will forever be, because there's so much individual variation. And Mike Israel has made some really great efforts to quantify training volume. But I mean, Bryce Lewis, so I'm personally coached by Eric Wadhorn of a strength athlete under Team TSA, and Bryce has a great article about all these things are great, but you can't doing 20 sets of squat versus 20 sets of leg extensions. That's different stress. There's also different things with Lyle McDonald has constantly said you probably should be chasing soreness. You shouldn't be chasing all these arbitrary things. You should probably choose a more of a minimally effective dose where you're probably going to make progress, and then work from there. But I guess I rambled there. Just to simplify things, and when you're determining training volume for an athlete, or how it will evolve over athletes' careers, and particularly in the context of powerlifting, how do you sort of determine training volume for it? And I've also been dealing with a lat strain recently. It really threw out after my last week competition for whatever reason. It's not because I changed my volume up too much, but how would you change volume or exercise selection if an injury did prop up?
Yeah, I think the first step is always assessment. And I think the difficult part, especially when you're talking about elite level lifters, is it's really everybody. Everybody's chasing the fastest gains possible. I just think there's more incentivization, of course, when someone's already at the world stage and trying to either break top 3 or become the world champion. But what I think everybody needs a little more of is that patience in the beginning of the assessment period, because it's just like finding your BMR or something. Finding your calories you burn at rest is a predictive equation or a hypothetical amount. These are just educated guesses at best. You need to have a starting point and then assess the accuracy of that starting point. So that's oftentimes where I'll start with somebody. Is I'll just look at how they come to me, and meaning their frequency of the main lifts and some general level of beginning volume of what they're doing right now. And I'm just looking to slightly increase from where they are when they come to me. So that first, even up to 12 weeks is really just an assessment of how do you tolerate if we give you a little less? How do we tolerate? Okay, now we start putting some in. So it's this regular, really it's just applying the scientific method. It's nothing more fancy than that. Okay, we know this seems to be your baseline volume. Let's see what happens if we give you a little less. Did you get stronger? We'll assess you. Oftentimes it's just by AMRAP, where it is a predictive, if your working sets are sets of 4 and if your working sets are sets of 6, you're at 80%. If you did 8 reps, roughly, you're at 80% of 1RM. You haven't really gotten stronger. If you've beaten that, you've probably gotten a little stronger. That is some indication that this level of volume is giving you enough stimulus that we can hang here for a bit, see how it works, and then only really intervene, meaning increase volume when it's necessary. So I think Mike T talks a lot about noise and eliminating noise when you're doing any type of analysis. And to me, I'm looking at what are, as of now, the first principles of what drives adaptation in strength and muscle growth, probably more so strength. And it's really, we have the main, I would consider the main 3 pillars of powerlifting, of stressor that drive adaptation. One is frequency, another one is volume, which they're intertwined, and then specificity. So those are the main things that I'm really are the main focal point. So to be even more clear about it, if someone's a powerlifting competitor, they're going to come, we'll have them back squat, bench press, deadlift, not variations, the competition version of those. If they come to me doing 2 days a week of, let's say 2 days a week of bench, we might start them out at 2 days, see where they are, then maybe go take them up to 3, see what happens. Obviously, when you jump up an extra day in frequency, you will indirectly increase volume. We'll just see what happens there. now we've eliminated a lot of the potential noise, because if you go from week one, or let's just say the first 4 weeks, you're pin pressing, and then you go to competition bench, you've kind of muddied up your analysis. If you've gone from, okay, I'm going to top set, and then I'm going to back off, and then I'm going to, over the course of 8 weeks, I'm changing my intensity schemes and everything else, you've just inserted a bunch of noise into your analysis. So I'm just really trying to start with the most minimalistic approach and see what happens when we just change the core things first. And then if there's no response, then it starts to get a little more complicated from there. But I think if you start with something overcomplicated from the beginning, you don't even know what you're chasing anymore. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's actually exactly my approach with any new athlete. A lot of it is basically very simple blocks with like you said, same intensity schemes, and seeing how they respond, because one, that's easier to it's easier to track, like you said, and then usually after that an initial block, then we'll see like, okay, like maybe after some technique analysis and whatever, like what are some variations that might be able to help, or potentially like change up the stimulus. And then I like what you said about like, don't just like I said, you didn't go immediately to increase volume.
Yeah.
It was like, let's find again like minimum effective dose, or essentially like the lower end of that adaptive dose. And then if things are slowing down and if the athlete subjectively feels okay, then that's when you would slightly increase volume. And it's not like you add 5 sets, it's like you maybe add like 1 or 2 sets, and that's
right.
Probably spur some progress.
Yeah, I think the thing that is the most difficult, the most hard sell in programming are two things, and it's true of really anything when you're providing coaching or you're mentoring in any way, is patience, and then sort of grit. Because the reality is, if you are adapting is not comfortable in any way. I mean, think of it like, if you go to med school, that's not comfortable. You are overwhelmed with information. If you go to graduate school, you're overwhelmed with work and information. There needs to be dose controlling for sure, but if you're always operating on the side of being afraid of being uncomfortable, adaptation is probably not going to happen the way you want it to. And I think the patience part is, like you said, not just dumping right in and going as hard as you can, as fast as you can, because that's just impatience. And the reality is, like, and I've seen this, I think I'm I'm a great example of this, is like, I've lived through all of those things. I've done that in my own training. I think it's what helped me really define the ceiling or the endpoints very well for me coaching anybody else. Is I know the real red flags of when something's a major warning sign. You only have one body. Like, you might want all the glory now in your 20s to win a couple world championships, but you got to live an entire life with that body. So patience is important, and it's hard. I mean, people play, sports like high school or professional or semi-professional football, and of course, there's a lot of incentivization and money to do that, where you can probably justify it. But in powerlifting, there's still not that much money where it makes that much sense. So you have to still have a logical side where it's like, okay, I want to make a career out of this. I'd like to lift for a long time. I'd like to be able to move when I'm in my 40s, 50s, 60s plus. So it doesn't need to be an emergency. And I think a lot of times people make emotional decisions within that, out of this like outside pressure. And I think it gets worse now with social media, because there's so many more eyes and perceived pressure, where you need to be making gains every meet. You need to be making, these crazy squat gains and stuff like that. And I think that can drive you into making some dangerous decisions. Again, it's a hard sell for somebody to say, hey, if we increase your numbers 5% every year, that's great. I mean, somebody might be like, no, it's not enough for me. I need to win. It's a hard sell, but like, I do think it's the better long-term sustainable path.
I agree a lot, because the risk of doing too much is injury and getting set back, and then you have to spend time rehabbing. And I've been able to find like sort of like, it's a little bit more recently, like my bench press, I think we found the training dose that actually works well for me. Because like in the past, we would push volume. We were doing like 3 times a week of like higher volume, and then I was like, dude, I just keep getting hurt. We've been doing this for like a year. My bench press is 331 and 342. And then, Eric and I made the decision to like, we'll just do less volume on that third day. So now I do 3 singles that are sub max, and that works really well. My squat, we've just found something that's very sustainable. Hasn't been like earth shattering progress, but it's like, holy crap, like I'm getting stronger every single time. And same with
But so that's the thing, is progress is progress. And that's, as long as it's moving in the right direction, that is a great sign that you're doing enough that you should just continue. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. But I think it's so easy to get greedy. I mean, again, I was guilty of it too. I think the best thing, like I try to be as a lesson for anybody that I work with, is you shouldn't repeat what I did. And I'm oftentimes encouraging people against, like, the question you always get is, I feel like I could do more. Can we do more? I think I can, like, what can I do to get as strong as I can as fast as possible? And like, I get it, but those are kind of the wrong questions.
There's a lot more that you can do outside of training. There's a lot more besides training that does determine your rate of adaptation. If you're like sometimes, like, for no reason at all, like the reason why you might have progressed really, really well this like past block is because like you just had better sleep, you had lower stress, or maybe
Even if you're more motivated,
exactly.
like
That's a huge thing actually. Like that belief in like what you're doing is going to work and that is absolutely everything. I feel like any good coach, and this is why I think that, and this is one of the things I always harp on with my clients: ask me questions. I want you to understand this. I want you to buy in. Like, for example, with my own programming, we traditionally were doing like a top set, down set approach with my deadlift. And then for this off season, after my meet, for the past 2 blocks, it's just been straight sets. And that gave me a lot of unease. Then I asked my coach, like, why are we just doing like sub max straight sets between 5 to 7 RPE? He's like, well, because it's your really good lift. We don't really need to push it super hard. It's probably not best for like hypertrophy. And you were still pushing your squat. And this is probably going to keep you a little bit healthier in the long run. Now, I didn't ask him that like the first time. So I went off program. I started doing all these heavy top sets, got like a PR set of 5 at 600. And then like everything hit the fan. And I was like, damn it. If I just asked a question, like, and like your coach should be able to give you an answer. It shouldn't just be shut up all the program.
Right. Yeah. I'm at the point now where I've been involved long enough to sort of know that if there's not buy-in in the beginning, the likelihood that it's going to work out great is not high. So I think that's a very important part, like you said. I do think it is important to calm people's nerves and anxiety about certain things, doing different things for sure. But I think it's true on both sides. I think it's important as the coach to assess whether the buy-in's there. And I also think that it's important for the potential client to not sign up with somebody where sort of right initially they're coming in overly skeptical, because you're going to make the process a lot more difficult and jarring than it needs to be. So I think for people like that, it's probably better to trip up on your own until you get to a point where you actually look in the mirror and you say, okay, I need help. Because until then, you're actually going to waste both your own money and the coach's time. By kind of like you said, is like, curiosity is a great thing. I always encourage people who are curious. Like if someone goes off plan, I'm not going to chastise them. I'll have a hard time understanding why they're paying me to go off plan, but I think curiosity is a great thing. And I think you need to chase it to a point either where you get answers and you keep doing things on your own, or you get really stuck in a rut and you either start to regress, or you say like, okay, I need some outside assistance and help. And I think, in my opinion, the best lifters in the world are the ones who are able to have enough of that ability to be outside themselves, where they say, okay, I'm super strong, I'm incredible, but I can't really do this alone. I think I need some outside help. And then they buy in, they get somebody who really speaks their language that they need, and they buy in and they commit to the plan. I think it's not just about being genetically strong. I think it's also about being genetically strong and really mentally tough, and well disciplined, to stick to things. So it's weird. In a way, you almost have to uh, go dumb to a certain degree, or just trust in the process. And you see this about, you see this in elite athletics at every level. Is like, why do you think everybody wants to play with Tom Brady? You could argue that he's probably not the most talented quarterback in the NFL, but everybody believes he's going to get them to a Super Bowl and to win a Super Bowl. That's enormous, enormous.
I think that's a great way to end this off. Honestly, I have nothing else to say after that. Like, I think that, yeah, that really hit home. I guess all I can say about that is, like, when I found like my best progress, it is because of that. It's because, like, it's freaking hard, and like I cry, like, and I throw my belt, and there's some days I'm going into the gym and I'm like, I don't want to do this. I'm freaking sore and tired and whatever. But you trust in the process, and commit to that process, and you know, not going beyond what your body can do. Like, you follow the program, you actually hit your RPE, even if it's 50 pounds less on that day for every reason. But you are like, well, it's fine. It just wasn't my day, and not getting caught up in that, and then being at the point where you're humble enough to, like, let somebody else help you get to where you want to go. So I really want to thank you for coming on. I really appreciate your time. If people want to know a little bit more about you, or get any of your fantastic products, where should they find you?
So this is always the hardest part for me. Let me first address.
Gardening dietitian.
What's that?
You're gonna pull a Zordos and say gardening dietitian.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure talking. I hope it's been helpful for your listeners, and it's been great. Yeah, just conversing between the two of us. Probably the best places are the website's elemental.fit. We've talked about the products quite a bit. You can get most of the essentials there from us. If people want to reach me directly, probably my Instagram's the best place. It's just at Ben Esgro. I mention this all the time. I've been really bad with getting new content out, but I also have a page that's just a passion project called Subsci. It's really just trying to address a lot of those things that we talked about, which is providing a better framework for people to understand supplements at the deepest level in a curriculum fashion, where it starts at something simple and builds. This is a long-term project. It's also difficult because I'm juggling so many other things, but the intent is always to get back there and drop more things progressively. I got a pretty good head start, and then I haven't been able to get back to it. So if people want to learn more about supplements and just understand supplements with no endpoint for sales on it, I would check out Subsci. That's pretty much it. Other than that, I'm happy to, if people have questions or anything else, they could just DM me or reach out through any of those outlets, and I'm always willing to help where I can.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for listening, and I'll talk to you guys in the next podcast.